There is a stretch of water 39 kilometers wide. 20 million barrels of oil pass through it every single day. One country has 7 islands inside it. That number, 20 million barrels, is not an abstraction. It is the daily energy supply of Japan, of South Korea, of India, of China, of most of the world's export manufacturing economies. They have no alternative route. They have no strategic reserve that lasts more than 90 days. Every refinery that runs on Gulf crude runs on the assumption that this strait stays open. The Strait of Hormuz is not wide. At its narrowest, 39 kilometers, roughly the distance from downtown to an airport, it is threaded by 2 shipping lanes, each 2 nautical miles across. 1 lane in, 1 lane out. The total navigable channel is roughly 6 nautical miles. A supertanker needs most of that. Iran sits on the northern shore. Its coast curves in, and 7 islands arc out from it like knuckles. Keshem, Larak, Hormuz Island, Hangam, Abu Musa, the 2 Tums. Researchers call this the arch defense. This formation is not a geographic coincidence. Iran has held the Tums since 1971, seized by force the day before the United Arab Emirates became a state. Abu Musa is jointly administered but effectively controlled. Keshem is home to an IRGC naval base. Larak sits at the eastern approach, where tankers begin their exit run. The islands form a layered defensive arc that lets Iran monitor, intercept, or threaten any vessel transiting the strait. The tankers have no other route. The Gulf's seabed is shallow. The Saudi coast is flat and unforgiving to deep draft vessels. The only deep water exit is here. By most estimates, this passage carries roughly a quarter of all seaborne oil on Earth, about 20 million barrels a day. There is 1 lane in, 1 lane out, and Iran has 7 positions commanding the transit. The question that analysts have debated for decades is whether Iran would ever close it. The answer, it turns out, was the wrong question. You don't have to close a door to extract rent from it, you just have to make people believe you might. In recent months, one vessel reportedly paid $2 million for safe passage through the corridor north of Larak Island. That payment was not made to a government. It was made to an IRGC commander with a radio and a fast boat. It was not a tariff. It was a toll. And it was not the only one. The gate had become a toll booth. It's not a choke point, it's a toll booth. The distinction matters. A choke point is a geography. A toll booth is a business model. Iran is not threatening to destroy the global energy market. It is inserting itself as an unavoidable intermediary in it. The threat of closure is the inventory. The actual disruption is the product. They built escape pipes. They don't escape the problem. Saudi Arabia understood the strategic vulnerability before almost anyone else. The Iranian Revolution happened in 1979. By 1981, Aramco had started planning an overland pipeline. By 1989, it was running. The East-West pipeline, called the Petroline, runs 1,220 kilometers from the Abqaiq oil processing complex in the east to the Red Sea port of Yanbu in the west. It bypasses the strait entirely. Design capacity, 5 million barrels per day. Emergency capacity, somewhere around 7 million, though that upper figure has, per the IEA, never been tested at full sustained flow. The Saudis did not advertise it loudly. It sits above ground for most of its length. Above ground means visible. Visible means targetable. The UAE built a different solution. The Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline runs 360 kilometers from the Habshan oil fields in the interior to the port of Fujairah on the Gulf of Oman. Fujairah sits east of the strait on the open ocean. Tankers loading there never enter the Hormuz Channel at all. The UAE pipe carries roughly 1.5 million barrels per day. Now lay the strait beside them, 20 million barrels a day through Hormuz. The Saudi Petroline at maximum 5 million. The UAE bypass 1.5 million. Combined 6.5 million on a perfect day. The gap is 13.5 million barrels per day. That gap cannot be piped around. There is no infrastructure pathway for it. It is a structural feature of the world energy system. Why wasn't more built? The honest answer is that nobody thought it was politically possible to close the strait. Closing Hormuz means closing Iran's own oil exports. It means inviting a military response that would destroy Iran's naval assets within days. The deterrent logic held for 40 years. It held so well that the bypass shortfall became invisible. 14 million barrels a day of unprotected exposure normalized into the background. In recent months, an Iranian drone struck one of the Saudi pumping stations along the Petroline and cut throughput by 700,000 barrels a day. The Fujairah loading terminals, the UAE's bypass exit, were hit on 3 separate occasions. This was not a coincidence. The strikes targeted the bypass infrastructure specifically, not the oil fields, not the processing plants, the escape routes. The message was legible. The bypasses are not bypasses, they are targets. 2 bypass pipes, 1 was bombed. The gap is still 14 million barrels a day. There is no pipe for that gap. There is no plan for that gap. The world has been running on faith that the gap would never matter. It matters now. The Houthis have not closed the Red Sea. They haven't needed to. At the southern end of the Red Sea sits a second choke point. The Bab el-Mandeb, the Gate of Grief in Arabic, is 26 kilometers wide at its narrowest, split by Perim Island, which Yemen controls. It connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Every vessel moving from Asia to Europe via the Suez Canal passes through it. Before 2023, roughly 18,000 ships transited annually. The Houthis hold Yemen's highlands and most of the Red Sea coast. They are not a navy. They are a political and military movement that controls territory adjacent to the world's second busiest shipping lane. That adjacency is the asset. The question of how the Houthis became a maritime force is a story that takes a decade to tell. The short version: Saudi Arabia invaded Yemen in 2015 to reverse a Houthi takeover. 9 years of bombing. One of the worst humanitarian disasters of the 21st century. The Houthis did not lose. They survived, adapted, and were armed with Iranian drones, Iranian missiles, Iranian technical advisors who understood the difference between a boat and a weapons platform. They have anti-ship missiles with a range of roughly 200 kilometers. That circle covers the entire southern Red Sea and the approaches to the strait. Everything from Djibouti to the Yemeni coast is inside it. Container ships, tankers, bulk carriers. They are all within range of systems the Houthis now operate with a degree of competence that has surprised Western naval planners. They used it. Over roughly 2 years, they struck more than 170 vessels. 4 were sunk. The rest sustained damage. More relevant than the physical strikes was the insurance math. In recent months, they went quiet on commercial shipping. Traffic through the strait fell by roughly 70% anyway. Why? Because the war risk insurance premium for a Red Sea transit became larger than the cost of sailing around Africa. Shipping companies do not need to be hit. They need the actuarial table to change. It changed, and the Houthis did not fire a single additional shot to accomplish it. The U.S. Navy's most recent carrier reached CENTCOM by sailing around the bottom of Africa, past Namibia, around the Cape. The strait was faster. The carrier took the long way. A carrier strike group going around the Cape adds approximately 11 days to the transit, 11 days of fuel, 11 days of extended supply lines, 11 days in which a different crisis cannot use that carrier. This is not a symbolic cost. It is an operational cost imposed by a force that has no aircraft carrier, no blue water navy, and no conventional military capability remotely comparable to the United States Navy. The asymmetry is the point. The second valve has not been closed, it has been pointed. A gun pointed at a door is leverage, even if you haven't pulled the trigger. The Houthi pause on commercial shipping is tactical, not strategic. They demonstrated capability, they imposed cost, they retained the option. The strait remains a gun pointed at the global shipping economy. The trigger is still in Houthi hands, and those hands take direction from Tehran. The shortest path from Tehran to Beirut is a road. It goes through Iraq, it goes through Syria. And for a decade, it worked. For roughly a decade, Iran ran a weapons pipeline on the ground. Not a metaphor, actual trucks, actual roads, actual border crossings. The Quds Force of the IRGC built it. It was their most consequential infrastructure project. Tehran southwest to the Iran-Iraq border. Link 1. The logic of this link begins in 2003. The American invasion of Iraq did not produce a pro-American Iraq. It produced a power vacuum that Iran, with more patience than anyone expected, filled. The post-Saddam Shia-majority government was susceptible to Iranian influence in ways that would take years to become visible. The Quds Force, under Qasem Soleimani, understood what the Americans had done. They had removed the one Arab Sunni state capable of blocking Iranian westward movement. Iran walked into the vacuum. Through Baghdad, up the Euphrates Valley to the border town of Al-Qaim, and directly across into Syrian Abu Kamal. Link 2. This crossing is the hinge of the whole system. Al-Qaim on the Iraqi side and Abu Kamal on the Syrian side sit across the Euphrates from each other. The border here is porous desert. The crossing was controlled at various points between 2012 and 2019 by whichever militia Iran chose to position there. After ISIS, the Popular Mobilization Forces held it. The route was regularized, trucks moved at night, the manifests said grain, the cargo was guidance systems. Damascus, Link 3. The Assad government's survival through the Syrian civil war was not free. Iran paid for it. The Quds Force deployed advisory units, financed the military, organized Hezbollah fighters from Lebanon to fight alongside Syrian army units, and in return secured permission to use Syrian territory as a transit and storage corridor. The warehouses outside Damascus held precision guidance components. The airstrips north of Homs handled Iranian cargo flights. The route was no longer improvised, it was institutional. West, through the anti-Lebanon mountains, into the Bekaa Valley, Beirut, Link 4. The Bekaa Valley is Hezbollah's heartland. The mountain passes between Damascus and the Bekaa are the final leg. Hezbollah received, stored, and deployed what came through those passes. By 2020, the group had transitioned from a rocket-heavy militia to something more dangerous. A force with precision-guided munitions, capable of hitting specific buildings in Tel Aviv from southern Lebanon. That capability was built on precision guidance kits that moved through this corridor, precision-guided missiles, drones, IRGC advisors, anti-tank systems. This route was the physical spine of what Iran called the axis of resistance. It took years to build. Every Iranian diplomatic investment in Baghdad, in Damascus, in Beirut was also an investment in this corridor's security. Tehran built a road to the Mediterranean. It took one rebel offensive to cut it. Assad fell in 8 days. The road fell with him. The Syrian section broke first. In December 2024, a rebel coalition led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and allied factions launched an offensive from Idlib in the northwest. The Syrian army, underpaid, demoralized, hollowed out by years of low-grade conflict and economic collapse, did not hold. Unit commanders surrendered before engaging. Checkpoints that Iran's corridor depended on dissolved overnight. The speed of the collapse surprised everyone, including, reportedly, Iran. The Assad government had been sustained by 3 external props: Russian air power, Iranian logistics, and Hezbollah fighters. By 2024, Russia was consumed by Ukraine. Hezbollah had just absorbed the heaviest military losses in its history, and the Syrian army had not been rebuilt into an independent fighting force. It had been kept dependent on Iranian advisors who now could not arrive fast enough. Remove all 3 props simultaneously and the structure does not bend, it falls. In December 2024, a rebel coalition took Damascus in 8 days. The new Syrian government cooperated with American forces to interdict weapons shipments. The Damascus link severed. The Lebanese end broke next and broke harder. Hezbollah's transformation into a precision strike force had taken 20 years to build. Israel spent the 18 months after October 7, 2023, systematically dismantling it. The targeting campaign was unlike anything Israel had previously attempted at this scale. Hezbollah's precision missile storage sites, identified through years of intelligence work, were struck in coordinated waves. Senior commanders were killed in rapid succession. The communications infrastructure Hezbollah had built over decades, the hardened fiber optic network that ran separate from Lebanese civilian telecommunications, was destroyed. Hezbollah entered late 2023 with roughly 150,000 rockets. Per Israeli military figures, and these are one side's count, between 85 and 90% of that arsenal has been destroyed. The surviving stockpile is estimated at somewhere between 10,000 and 23,000 rockets. But the relevant loss is not numerical, it is qualitative. The precision-guided portion of the arsenal, the weapons capable of killing specific targets at specific coordinates, is gone. What remains is unguided. What remains can create casualties. It cannot create strategic deterrence. Nasrallah is dead. His designated successor is dead. The second tier of the organization's leadership has been systematically decapitated. Hezbollah continues to exist as a political party, as a social services provider, as an armed faction with tens of thousands of trained fighters. But as the precision strike deterrent force that Iran spent 20 years building to threaten Tel Aviv, that force no longer exists. In March 2026, the Lebanese cabinet formally banned Hezbollah's military wing. The vote included Hezbollah's own Shia political allies. That vote is a political fact with structural implications. Hezbollah's Shia coalition partners, calculating that the armed wing had become more liability than asset, chose the Lebanese state over the axis of resistance. The social contract that had kept southern Lebanon as Hezbollah's sovereign territory, outside Lebanese army jurisdiction, outside Lebanese law, is being renegotiated. It has not yet been settled, but it has been opened. The hinge at Abu Kamal is still partially held by Iranian-backed militias. It now moves smuggled goods, not precision missiles. The crossing that Soleimani spent a decade securing has been degraded to a rat line. Fuel, pharmaceuticals, small arms, not guided munitions, not strategic weapons. The logistics infrastructure of the axis of resistance is operating at a fraction of its former capacity. 4 links, 2 severed, 1 hinge reduced to a smuggling route. 1 frayed node in Iraq. The axis of resistance is not a network anymore. It's a chain with 2 broken links and 1 hinge that's barely holding. And the only thing Iran can honestly point to as a functioning forward deployment is the node it has the least political control over. When the chain breaks, the strongest link doesn't break. It becomes the whole story. Iraq's Shia militias, the Popular Mobilization Forces, or PMF, are legally part of Iraq's security establishment. They were created in 2014 in response to a fatwa by Grand Ayatollah Sistani calling on Iraqis to fight ISIS. They were effective. They helped retake Mosul. They were rewarded with formal integration into the Iraqi armed forces. They receive salaries from the Iraqi Ministry of Finance. They are, on paper, Iraqi state actors. But the most powerful factions within the PMF do not take orders from Baghdad. They take orders from Tehran. More specifically, from the IRGC's Quds Force successor operations that outlasted Soleimani's death in 2020. Kataib Hezbollah, Asaib al-Haq, Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba. These are not the PMF's largest factions numerically. They are its most operationally capable factions. They control PMF intelligence operations. They hold a declared closed military zone in southern Iraq, a strip of territory near the Syrian border that Iraqi government inspectors cannot enter. They maintain weapons depots that the Iraqi government has officially requested access to and has not received. They are a state within a state within a state. The political paradox is acute. The Iraqi government, dominated by Shia political parties, many of which have their own ties to Tehran, has spent the last 3 years trying to bring the pro-Iran factions under formal state control. It has not succeeded. The October 2019 protest movement that swept Baghdad and Basra was directed in significant part against Iranian influence in Iraqi affairs. Those protesters were shot. Some of the killings were attributed to militia snipers. The Iraqi Street and the Iranian-backed PMF factions are not in alignment, but the Iraqi government does not have the power to disarm them. It lacks both the military capability and the political consensus. Since late February 2026, they have conducted drone strikes on coalition positions in Baghdad, fired on Gulf Arab states, and abducted an American journalist inside the capital. The abduction of a journalist inside Baghdad, in a city with a substantial U.S. diplomatic and military presence, is an assertion of impunity. It is the PMF factions demonstrating that the Iraqi government cannot stop them from operating in the capital. It is also a message to Tehran: we are still operational. We are still yours. We still have reach. Hezbollah is depleted. Damascus is cut. The Houthis have their valve but have held fire on commercial shipping for months. Iran's most consequential surviving proxy does not fire precision missiles from Lebanon or drones from Yemen. It drives in convoys through Baghdad. It recruits in Iraqi Shia mosques. It processes finances through Iraqi banks. It is embedded in the Iraqi state in ways that cannot be removed without destabilizing the Iraqi state itself. That is precisely the problem. The axis of resistance has one working node. It's inside a country whose government wants it gone, and whose government cannot remove it without risking the same kind of collapse that brought it to power in the first place. Iran's leverage in Iraq is simultaneously Iran's biggest remaining asset and the most structurally fragile thing it has. Israel is 14 kilometers wide, Iran is 1,400 kilometers across. So Israel built a ring? At Israel's narrowest point, near Tulkarm, the country is 14 kilometers wide. To put that in physical terms, it is the distance from one side of a mid-sized city to the other. At that width, a ground force with any modern mobility can reach the sea before any serious defensive depth can be organized. 3/4 of Israel's population lives inside that coastal plain. Most of its industry, its airport, its port of Haifa, all of it accessible from the West Bank ridgeline within minutes by ground or within seconds by guided rocket. The West Bank ridge runs north to south like a spine above the coastal plain. From those heights, a guided mortar can reach Tel Aviv's suburbs. An unguided rocket with any range can reach the airport. The topography is an engineering problem that Israel cannot solve by diplomacy or law. It can only be solved by controlling the high ground or by ensuring the high ground is not militarized. Iran's answer to Israeli geography was to militarize from outside. Build a ring of fire around the country, a threat from Lebanon in the north, a threat from Syria in the northeast, a threat from Gaza in the southwest, all simultaneously coordinated, forcing Israel to defend on multiple axes at once. The October 7, 2023 attack was, among other things, a test of whether that ring could trigger a multi-front war. It did not, because by that point, Iran's ring was already fraying. Israel's answer was a different kind of ring, a ring of hills, a ring of buffer zones, a ring of positions that push any adversary back far enough that 14 kilometers becomes, if not safe, at least defensible. Gaza Buffer Zone. The IDF is not withdrawing. It has established a permanent security belt along the northern Gaza perimeter and along the Philadelphia corridor on the Egyptian border. Palestinian civilians cannot return to large portions of northern Gaza. The political cost is substantial. The military rationale is that a force based in northern Gaza could reach Israeli communities in under 3 minutes. A buffer zone adds time. Time is the geometry of defense when your country is 14 kilometers wide. South Lebanon, 5 hilltop positions still held past the April 2026 ceasefire, physically overlooking the border crossings. These positions were supposed to be temporary. They remain. They sit on ridges that command the Litani River Valley, the natural terrain through which any Hezbollah ground reconstitution would have to pass. Holding them means controlling observation over the route by which Hezbollah would rebuild. Withdrawing them means ceding that observation. Israel has not withdrawn. The Syrian Golan Buffer extended in December 2024 to 9 military posts inside Syrian territory. The original Golan occupation dates to 1967. The additional buffer positions were taken in the days after Assad fell, a window in which no Syrian force existed capable of contesting them. The new Syrian government has protested. The protests are noted. The posts remain. Mount Hermon, 2,800 meters. It is the highest point in the entire Levant. In clear weather, Israeli intelligence assets on its peak can observe into Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and parts of Iraq. It physically overlooks the Bekaa Valley, the surviving corridor toward Beirut. Whoever holds Mount Hermon holds the observation post for the entire northern theater. Israel holds Mount Hermon. Iran built a ring of fire. Israel built a ring of hills. Both are reading the same map. Both are waiting for the other to run out of positions. Iran's ring depended on persistent forward deployment in territories Iran does not govern. It depended on proxies that remain loyal, on regimes that remain stable, on corridors that remain open. 3 of those 4 conditions have failed. Israel's ring depends on something different: military control of terrain it does not legally own, sustained indefinitely, against the political resistance of the international community, the surrounding states, and the populations on the ground. That is also a fragile condition, but it is a different kind of fragility. Iran's ring pointed inward at Israel. Israel's ring pointed back at everything on Iran's horizon. Both rings are contracting. Neither side can articulate what the stable endpoint looks like. 2 blockades, 2 countries, neither can afford to let go first. The structure of the current confrontation is a mutual trap. Since late February 2026, Iran has run what observers describe as a de facto partial blockade of the Strait, a tollbooth corridor selectively clearing or halting tanker traffic. Not every tanker, not always. Enough to signal control, enough to extract premium, enough to remind the buyers of Gulf crude that the price includes an Iranian surcharge. The United States responded with a naval blockade of Iranian ports. The same body of water. By most accounts, Brent crude has traded between $90 and $120 in recent weeks. The American blockade of Iranian ports is legally contested but militarily real. Iran's oil exports, already constrained by sanctions, have been further reduced. Iran's import capacity is strained. Medical equipment, agricultural inputs. The populations that bear the cost of a blockade are not the populations that designed the policy. They are the populations that had no vote on either side of this confrontation. The oil price at $90 to $120 is not neutral. It is a tax on every economy that imports energy. It transfers wealth from net importers to net exporters. It slows growth in manufacturing economies in Asia. It inflates food prices because fertilizer is priced in energy. It pushes transport costs onto every supply chain on Earth. And it does all of this without a single additional barrel being produced. The scarcity is political, not geological. The wells are full. The pipeline is the problem. Qatar handles roughly 20% of global LNG. It lost 17% of that export capacity when 2 of its liquefied gas trains were destroyed. Qatar Energy put the repair timeline at 3 to 5 years. This damage lands differently than an oil disruption. Qatar's LNG is not fungible. Its customers, primarily in Europe and East Asia, signed long-term contracts precisely because LNG spot markets are thin and alternatives are limited. Europe spent the years after 2022 rebuilding its gas supply away from Russian pipelines. The replacement strategy was Qatar. Qatar is now damaged. The European contingency plan for energy independence has a 3 to 5 year hole in it. The transition to renewables was always a decade-scale project. The disruption is happening on a year scale. There is no bridge. The whole machine is running, but it's running against itself. This is the paradox Iran built and cannot escape. The Strait is Iran's greatest source of leverage because the world depends on it. But the world depends on it because Iran's economy depends on exporting through it. Every barrel of Iranian crude that Iran's government needs revenue from must pass through the same channel it is threatening. The gate is its own sword. Point it at the world, and you also point it at yourself. The IRGC factions that benefit from tollbooth revenue are not the same as the Iranian state actors that need oil export revenue. That internal division between factions that profit from disruption and an economy that suffers from it is the machine's deepest fault line. It does not have an obvious resolution. 1 country, 7 islands, 1 stretch of water 39 kilometers wide. The chain is broken, the proxies are depleted, the bypass pipes are bombed, the second valve is pointed, the dual blockade has locked the room from both sides. The gate that opened this fight is the only thing that can close it. That means the party that controls the gate must choose between leverage and survival. That choice is structurally insoluble under the current political configuration. No IRGC commander benefits from opening the gate for free. No American president can announce a withdrawal from a blockade that is extracting real costs on Iran. Neither side has a face-saving exit. Neither side can afford the cost of staying. The gate was supposed to be Iran's leverage. Now it's the lock on the whole room. The room is small, the lock is heavy, and both sides hold a key that will not turn without the other.